All right, I have 11:03 on my clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Does that look good on your end, Michelle? Michelle Ioka?
Yeah, looks good. We still have quite a few that, we're going to join, but that's okay. We'll still, they can join and just listen when they get on. So I agree, Lori, we should move forward.
Okay, great. And we're going to record this webinar. So those that aren't able to listen in today will be able to come back and listen as we move forward. So I want to welcome you to the Early Learning Funding Opportunities here in Illinois. And with so much emphasis on layered services and blended funding and all of that that our programs are working with and through, we thought it would be a great idea to bring together our state partners and talk about a little bit about their programs and how they work and how the funding works and how we might be able to think about layering services with those with our state partners. We also have Donna Emmons on the phone, our Head Start Collaboration Director. Donna, would you like to say hello at all?
Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm going to chime in if it's okay. I'm coughing already. Oh dear. I'll chime in with some questions and comments if that's okay with Michelle Wood and Mike. In case I think of something on how Head Start programs can blend their funds with State Board of Education and DHS funds. But this should be very interesting. So thanks so much to both of you for sharing with us this morning.
Great, thank you, Donna. And do we have Felicia? Is Felicia Crawford on the phone by any chance? If not, I'd just like to introduce Felicia as the DHS Collaboration Director, who's fairly new in the department and with her work as Collab Director. So if she's on, we welcome her, and if not, we look forward to working through and in the next, as we move forward around our next steps. So, all right, enough of me blabbering here. Let's jump right in here. I had a slide before that. Let's see if I can get back to it. Oh, geez. There's our goal. So I ran through Michelle, your PowerPoint pretty quickly there, didn't I? Sorry about that. So let's dive in and look at our goals for today. So again, we really want to become familiar with funding streams and how best to leverage state funding to meet some of our program goals. And our second goal is really to understand requirements of state funding. So I know there's a lot of questions around requirements of state funding and funding streams. So this will be really interesting to learn more and find out about the requirements. And then the last one is just basically to learn how state funds can be utilized to support and meet program and community needs for those most vulnerable children and families that we're serving in our communities across Illinois. All right, so I'm going to move right into Michelle's slides here. So Michelle, here's your first slide here. So just let me know when you're ready for the next one and I'll move it along for you. First of all, Michelle, I probably introduced you, and then if you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, that'd be great. So Michelle Wood, Principal Consultant with the Illinois State Board of Ed. What I know about Michelle is she's dedicated and passionate about the work she does, and I know that she has a Head Start background, which makes it even better for us to have somebody within the State Board of Ed that understands how Head Start works in our complex world. So, Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Of course, like Lori said, I'm Michelle Wood. I work with the Illinois State Board of Education. I've been here about 3 years, and I'm also a board member, IHSA board member and Region 5 board member. I do collaboration work within the state and as well with Head Start. So that's some of the work I do, as well as work with state-funded preschool programs and 0 to 3 funding. So the purpose of the PFA grant, or the Early Childhood Block Grant, which is Preschool for All Expansion and Prevention Initiative, is to provide at least a 12.5-hour weekly program of high-quality preschool for children, and that is just the Preschool for All. Now, Prevention Initiative, of course, is center-based and home visiting for 0, or prenatal, I should say, to 3. And then we have our expansion program, which has more requirements, but also provides comprehensive services to children in a full-day model. So there are several programs, but under the Early Childhood Block Grant, which is Part 235 of the Illinois Administrative Code, all 3 of those programs fall underneath that. So this is kind of an overview of all 3 of those programs, but with more specific on Preschool for All, because that's our most common. So all of the applicants must serve a high number of children and families that are determined to be the most at risk, and in locations where there are insufficient number of other programs in the community. And so currently we have a request for proposal out, which is due June 10th, and that grant period will begin July 1st of this year, and it will end on June 30th of 2020. And so with funding in 3 subsequent years, contingent upon sufficient appropriation by the General Assembly. Next slide. So who is eligible to apply for these funds? And this is all Early Childhood Block Grant programs. That would be regional offices of education, public school districts, university laboratory schools approved by ISB, charter schools, area vocational centers, or any public or private entity which experiences in providing educational, health, social, or child development services to young children and their families. So this would be your child care centers, your community-based organizations such as Head Start programs. And a portion of our Early Childhood Block Grant funding goes to fund the Chicago Public Block Grant, which is 37% of any funds. So in this fiscal year, there's an additional $100 million that is proposed by the General Assembly, or actually by the governor. And so the General Assembly has to obviously approve that, and we don't have a budget yet for fiscal year 20, which starts July 1st. And so if we get that additional $100 million increase, 37% will go to the Chicago Block Grant. And so applicants proposing to provide services to children and families within the Chicago city limits, they must apply for those funds through Chicago School District. Next slide. And so our competitive application that's out for this fiscal year 2020, it is a competitive application, and it's for Preschool for All, Expansion and Prevention Initiative. The grant period will begin July 1st of this year and extend to June 30th, 2020. And then funding will be in 3 subsequent years and will be contingent upon state grant making rules and sufficient appropriation for the program and satisfactory progress in preceding grant years. So you must meet all requirements of the grant in order to continue your continuation grant. All right, next slide. What is GATA? GATA is the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. It is state legislation that requires the adoption and implementation of a comprehensive set of standards that mandate accountability and transparency throughout the entire life cycle of a grant. And so if you are receiving a grant within the state of Illinois, you must go through the GATA process in order to receive those funds. And so it's supposed to reduce burden on programs. I'm not sure that it has done that, but it's supposed to give a single authoritative statewide comprehensive source of for state agencies, so that way it's one single pass through for all entities. So you're registering in the portal one time, and so the public can search our database, the CSFA, for agencies with active grants programs currently funded for all funding opportunities, and register for grantees. So if you're looking for a grant opportunity, you can go to this database and see what Illinois has as far as grant opportunities statewide. And there are certain requirements that you have to meet, registering for a DUNS number, a SAMS cage code, making sure that you are not on the stop pay list, that you're in good standing with the state of Illinois, all these things that you have to do before you can receive a grant through the state of Illinois. It's supposed to eliminate and make things more transparent. I'm not sure, like I said, I'm not sure that it has done that, but we're trying to make out processes a little bit more streamlined within our agency and within other state agencies that you receive grant funds for. Okay, next slide. Funding priorities. So this year is a little bit different than any other year, but we have identified different funding priorities. So applicants that propose to serve primarily children who have been identified as being at risk, and that's always been part of our block grant rules. But for the purpose of our funding for this year, programs serving primarily at-risk children are defined by those who have 80% or more of the enrolled children are identified as being at risk, and so those are prioritizing students over those not at risk when making enrollment decisions. So having taken proactive measures to ensure that parent and guardians of potentially at-risk children in the community are aware of the opportunity for preschool education through their program. So according to a legislative mandate in awarding grants under the Early Childhood Block Grant, the first priority must be given to applicants that propose to serve children who have been identified as being at risk of academic failure. At-risk children are those who, because of their home and community environment, are subject to such language, cultural, economic, and like disadvantages that they have been determined as a result of a screening procedure to be at risk of academic failure. A disproportionate share of all children considered to be at risk from low-income families, including low-income families, homeless families, families with English is not their primary language spoken in the home, or families where one or both parents are teenagers or have not completed high school. Programs serving primarily at-risk children are defined as those in which have 80% more of the enrolled children identifying as at being risk, like I stated earlier. And that's for Preschool for All. Now for Prevention Initiative, 100% of the children enrolled in that program must be identified as being at risk. And for the expansion program, there are different requirements, which you can find those on our early childhood website at ISB.net, and that will identify those more clearly. Next slide. Funding information. So individual grant awards are based on sufficient appropriation by the General Assembly, and ISB appropriates making individual grant awards with those priorities given to proposals from entities that offer to serve children who reside in Tier 1 or Tier 2 district boundaries and that can demonstrate a local gap in services in their area. Award funding will reflect the cost of operating a program for a minimum of 165 student attendance days per year, and that's for both PFA and PFA expansion. Prevention Initiative has a little bit different requirement there and you can visit the Prevention Initiative page, and the compliance checklist will outline the requirements for that program. Applicants should request funds to facilitate services to the most at-risk families. Next slide. Collaboration and coordinated intake. So one of the, there we go. Programs wishing to apply for early childhood block grant funding should work with community partners who receive state and federal funding in their area to avoid oversaturation in programming. And this means that if your area or your community collaborates to coordinate an intake process that provides families with a single point of entry into an early childhood program, so that way there could be a hub for services, which would include PFA and Head Start, which could assess the family's needs. So they're referring them to the appropriate program that makes their needs the best, meets their needs the best, and tracking what happens for the referrals. That's the most ideal situation, but it's not always possible. But that is sort of an overarching goal of the state. And that is all I have at this point. So thank you.
Michelle, this is Donna. I had a comment. The all collaboration coordinated intake, yeah, you're right, coordinated intake would be ideal for every community. But they just need to be talking to each other, right? Programs in the community so that we don't oversaturate, not everybody doesn't apply for the same kids or whatever. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Donna. And I was wondering, Michelle, I need to go and look, but can you just give us the big differences between PFA-E expansion and regular PFA? What the difference in eligibility requirements are?
Sure. So PFA expansion, there's 4 priorities. You have to, in this RFP, there's not a requirement for 4-year-olds. Like you have to meet a certain, there used to be a 75% or more had to be 4-year-olds. Well, in this RFP, there's not. So that's not a requirement anymore. But you do have to be 200% FBL or below, where in PFA, there's not an income requirement. It's required that we collect income, but there's not an income cap like there is for expansion. And comprehensive services such as mental dental homes, parent educators, instructional leaders, all that stuff is required components of expansion, where it's recommended practices in preschool for all. So it's not that you can't have it in preschool for all, it's just not required. It's just where it's not equitable. So in preschool for all, some programs might have the 2.5-hour program, or they might have a full day program, but they don't offer comprehensive services to their preschool for all, but they might in expansion, where you have to incorporate the entire model, family engagement and, nutrition and they have to be, 200% FBL and below, or homeless or foster child, in order to meet the eligibility criteria to be in the PFA-E program. But to be in PFA, you just have to have 2 or more at-risk factors. So that could be, many different things. It could be income, but it doesn't have to be. So if that makes sense, I don't know if I explained it well enough.
That helps a lot.
Okay.
I know some Head Start programs that have combined blended, I don't know if you call it blended, but layered on funding, Head Start funding and Preschool for All expansion or Preschool for All funding, to make a longer day and to have a PEL teacher in the classroom or a third person in the classroom. So, I mean, that's certainly okay with ISB, right, to have
Yes,
both
and you can, to pay for, ISB, you have to have certified, teaching staff, and you can use our funds to help pay for those type of positions, the ones that are certified, because it's a requirement of our grant. Things like that. Anything that's a requirement of our grant, which may not necessarily would be considered, acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah, there are lots of ways probably to do it.
There's lots of ways to do it without, certainly.
Yeah.
And we've got some good examples of that happening. I wonder, I'm just brainstorming along with you, Michelle and Donna, if that would be, if we could write some of those models up and share them with people, if that would be beneficial moving forward. What do you think about that? If we could write, what those models look like and write them up and then share them more broadly, would that be something, that would be helpful, you think?
I would be willing to help with that if you want.
Yeah, I would too. I think it'd be really helpful because we do get a lot of questions, and I know Michelle does too, probably, about can we do this? Is this okay? And I think that would be a great guidance document to have on ISB's website and also on the Head Start Association website. And
we can work together to put together something like that.
We'll include CCAP on there too, and we'll have people.
Yeah.
There are some programs that access everything, probably. So sure there are.
And there we go. That would be one of our next steps moving forward. So I've got that down in my notes. So speaking of CCAP, I'll turn it over to Mike Gardner with the Child Care Bureau within the Department of Human Services. And I've heard great things about Mike through my colleagues, especially Jenna Ruther. And so I'm really excited that Mike could be on the phone and on the webinar with us today. But I'll let Mike introduce himself and turn it over to Mike, and let me know when you want me to turn your slides, and I'll do that for you, Mike. So thank you again.
No problem. Thank you. This is Mike Gardner-Jones. I've been with the DHS Child Care Program for just over 25 years. I've done a little bit of everything, but not contracting. So I'll try to talk around that as much as I can today. I'm the third string today, and Keisha Hobbs, our associate director, was supposed to be on. She got stranded out of state over the weekend. Then our bureau chief, Keisha Davis, is on a call with DCFS that has already been planned for today. So you got me. So I'll do the best I can.
Hey, Mike. I was able to join. I'm on the call as well now.
Great. Thank you, Keisha.
You're welcome.
You want me to go on with the slides?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP, is part of IDHS. We've had a child care program in Illinois since since whenever they got rid of the child care disregard. It's been around 1995 or so. Where before you had to be on a cash assistance grant. In those days it was AFDC, now it's TANF, and you were only on the program while you were on your cash assistance. And then we had another program called Transitional Child Care, which gave you funding for an additional 12 months after you earned your way out of AFDC, as long as you're still under income guidelines at that time. And then there was a third program back then called at-risk child care for people who had gone through their 12-month transitional. They were still working, but they were still low income. At the time that program became part of what we have now as the Child Care Assistance Program, we had a pretty big waiting list for that program, the at-risk program. And then it went away overnight because we completely changed our structure. Back then, like I say, you had to be either on AFDC or within 12 months, basically, to get assistance. When we got authorization from the feds to redo things, we became strictly an income and activity based eligibility system. So as long as you're meeting our income guidelines, which we'll talk about, you're in an activity and some basic things, you were able to get onto our program. As far as our contracting goes, we have two different entities basically that manage our child care assistance program caseloads. Those are child care resource and referral agencies, or CCR&Rs. We have 17 of those around the state. Each managing cases in a certain service delivery area. That's as small as one county, Cook County, which is about 60% of our caseload. Or if you look down at our very bottom SDA, we have about 14 counties that are managed by our CCR&R at John A. Logan Community College down in Carterville. Contracts for sites, up until this year, and this is part I'm not real familiar with, but I'm relying on some information from colleagues. And Keisha, please jump in if I get any of this wrong. Our site contracts are becoming administrative contracts as opposed to uniform grant agreements, which is what they had been up to now. So as I understand it, that relieves some of the burden of the process on both sides of it. The CCR&Rs are currently UGA. They're still under the uniform grant agreement. So we had these two different entities. We had the CCR&Rs that managed the child care assistance program, a part that's called the certificate program. So certificate program, any family who qualifies can choose most any provider that they want in Illinois. They don't have to be licensed per se. If they are licensed, great. That makes life a little bit easier because licensing process already takes care of a lot of things that we want to check for. Or we can also accept license exempt child care providers. This can be kith and kin care, friend and family, next door neighbor, grandma, aunts, what have you, as long as they meet some certain requirements. So they have to go through a background check. They're going to have some training requirements for all licensed and licensed that providers will have to go through some monitoring by the state, those sort of things. The site side of our contract, our site administered child care, those are individual child care centers generally that have contracts directly with IDHS for the child care assistance program.
Promotion home. So literally, I mean, like an hour after they're out of school, they have to be there. That's funny.
I'm sorry, is there a question?
You need to mute your phone if you're not speaking, please. Thank you. Sorry about that, Mike.
No problem at all. So the site program have contracts with DHS for a certain number of child care slots and a certain number of children each fiscal year that they can bill for through their site administrator contract. These providers can also bill through their CCR&R. So if a site contract, let's say Carol Robertson Center, for example, here in Chicago, if let's just say they're contracted for 100 children, but they may have capacity for 200. Mm-hmm. Once they're using all their contract funds, they can use the other side of our program through the CCR&R in Cook County, which is Action for Children. So providers, that are contracted with us are contracted for a certain number of slots, but they can accept more children than that in the child care assistance program through the other funding stream, basically. And I'll talk about where our money comes from here in a little bit. And I just hit the next slide button on my keyboard because that's what I'm used to. So real quick on some of our eligibility guidelines, and these are changing. A lot of things are changing in the child care assistance program currently, and that's because the federal funding stream, the Child Care and Development Block Grant, or the Child Care and Development Fund, was reauthorized in 2014 for the first time since it was put into existence in 1996. So in 2014, President Obama signed reauthorization, and it really gave a lot more structure to all the states and territories that use that fund for child care assistance. A couple of things I did get in the slides this morning because I put these together fairly quickly. Things like, and this is great for collaboration with Head Start especially, we've gone from a 6-month standard eligibility period to a 12-month standard eligibility period. So that gets us a little bit closer to Head Start eligibility. It's not up to 24 months to match early Head Start, but it's getting us a little bit closer to those guidelines. And a lot less reporting requirements from the parents in the program. We are taking a lot less of the information that is changing. We're not raising our co-payments, which every family in our program, most every family in our program, pay a portion of the care based on their income and their family size. and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Collaboration, traditionally, or at least for the past several years, collaboration between the Child Care Assistance Program and Head Start Early, Head Start Pre-K pretty much gave some advantages to the families that now all the families in CCAP has. Before, if a family was attending a collaboration program between Head Start, Early Head Start, and CCAP, we would allow a 12-month eligibility period instead of 6 months, and we would give a 90-day grace period for loss of activity. Those are standard requirements now for our program, our standard guidelines in our program now. So I think there's a lot of talk within our department on what to do with collaboration now. As you mentioned earlier, Lori, Felicia Crawford has joined us. She's still getting up to speed, but she's joined us as our collaboration director now. So hopefully she'll be finding some good ways to incentivize collaboration between the programs as well. Looking forward, now that we have a lot of our same parameters where we used to be just for collaboration. So our funding is used for mainly parents that are working or going to school. If they're on TANF, that's definitely okay. It's not a criteria like it used to be in the old days. So TANF, now we did a few years ago when we didn't have a budget, have to restrict our intake. And at that point, TANF recipient was one of our priorities. Now it's just part of our regular intake. We don't have any waiting list in Illinois. Pretty much any family that applies that is eligible gets approved and funded. So that includes TANF recipients, whether they're working or going to school or any other sort of activity that their TANF caseworker has approved. Teen parents in high school, GED, families who are working and or going to education and training with special needs children. That was really put in the restricted intake days. We did specify special needs children as being a priority group. Okay, next slide. Working families whose gross income is below our maximum income level, and we'll look at those here in a little bit. We do use gross income when we determine family income. We use earned income and some unearned income like Social Security income, child support income, those sort of things. Families that aren't on TANF can also get funding for education and training up to their first bachelor's degree. For lower types of education like vocational training or associate's degrees, they can now get multiple certificates or associate's degrees, but nothing higher than their first bachelor's of science or bachelor's of arts degrees. Back in the old day, we didn't have any education activity as a criteria for approval. So when we did that, I think we helped a lot of families. Okay, next slide. A couple of things that we've added to our eligibility criteria here recently, again, based on this reauthorization of our federal funds, fall under something that DCFS always used to have, and now DHS is starting to pick up on, and that's protective services. Right now, we have some special criteria for families that are experiencing homelessness and for families that were part of the DCFS Intact Families system. So homeless families that, all they have to do is fill out a form declaring that they're homeless and state a local agency that they're working with to try to address some of their needs from being homeless. In those cases, we're approving for 3 months, even if they don't have an activity. So normally, if a family applies, they have to be in one of those activities, either an education or an employment activity, in order to be approved. Under protective services, for those 3 months, they don't have to be part of any activity to be approved. We're also going to give them a $1 copayment for those 3 months. They can have 2 of those 3-month periods in a 12-month period. So 6 months out of 12 months, they can have child care assistance for a $1 copayment without any service activity. The DCFS Intact Families, these are families that DCFS has been working with to try to keep the family together. There's something that's happened with the family where there's a chance that the child might be taken from the family and put into the foster or the guardianship system. So DCFS gives them 6 months of child care as part of their supportive services. Recent legislation was passed that said the Child Care Assistance Program, DHS, should also provide a second 6 months for these families. So sort of like the homelessness, they'll have a $1 co-payment. They won't have to have a service activity. They won't have to meet our income guidelines. Both of these categories, I said, have a $1 co-payment. And that's right now because our administrative rule says everyone has to pay a co-payment except for 2 others, really small groups. So until that administrative rule is changed, which I think we're looking into, these parents will have at least a $1 co-payment. Okay, next slide. Parents or guardians have to be an Illinois resident. No 6 months or anything like that. They just have to be living here. As far as guardians go, we can accept a family member that the child is living with within the first 5 degrees of kinship as an applicant, as long as the parent's not living in the home, without legal guardianship. Anyone outside the first 5 degrees of kinship would have to have court documents that shows that they are a legal guardian. The family must meet income guidelines. They have to be employed or in an approved education or activity. And the children have to be under the age of 13, or if there's special needs, either medical, mental, court order reason, they can be up to the age of 18. This is another thing that reauthorization has changed. Before, we had to cancel a child the month that they turned 13. Now they're eligible for the entire 12-month eligibility period that they turned 13, as long as it's not the first month of eligibility. So if we approve a case starting in May and the child turns 13 in June, they have the remainder of that 12-month period on the program. Okay, next slide. CCR&Rs and our site administered providers are the only ones who determine eligibility for our program. Back to sites real quick, the City of Chicago Family Support Services has one of our site contracts, and they have about 200 delegate child care centers underneath them as subcontractors. Providers have to decide whether they'll start providing care before they're approved or not. Sometimes because there's a request for additional information that are needed from the clients. Sometimes it can take a while to get the approval established. We do have in our contract with both of our sites and our CCR&Rs that they are to make a determination within 45 days. Okay, next slide. Our income guidelines, as of right now, we have a bifurcated system of income, one income level for new applications, one higher income level at the time that we redetermine the case at the end of the 12-month period. And then we have a ceiling that we can't go above regardless. So for new applicants, they can be at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. At redetermination, they can be up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And also at redetermination, and both of those will get them a 12-month eligibility period. Graduated phase-out is a 3-month approval period, when at redetermination they're between 200% of FPL and 85% of state median income, just to make it nice and simple, throwing in 2 different income guidelines with federal poverty level and site median income, which we have charts for. Any time that we determine that a family is over 85% of SMI, they are no longer eligible for our funding. Okay, next slide. I keep hitting that arrow button. Real quick, just because we had some changes over the past year or so, how we're structured here. We used to be the Bureau of Child Care and Development. We've now broken into 2 different bureaus under the Office of Early Childhood. We have the Bureau of Quality Initiatives with Cindy Wall as our Bureau Chief, and our Bureau of Subsidy Management with Keisha, who's on the call, is our Bureau Chief. Next slide, please. I won't bore too much with numbers here, but just wanted to give a breakdown of what our caseload has been like over the past couple of years. I will note that FY18 certificates is a typo. There should be a 1 in front of that, 20. We didn't have that big of a drop in caseload on the certificate program. That should be 120,825 children served for FY18 under the certificate program. So we have seen a decrease in our caseload over the past few years. We've been trying to figure out what's caused that and how to counter that. We know that there are a lot of families that are eligible for our program that haven't applied for it. So we're trying to figure out, is it because they don't know about it? Is it because they can't find providers that will take our payments? because of our rates or what have you. And we're going to be trying to address that sliding caseload here over the next year. Okay, next slide. Again, won't bore you with numbers, but we also see that our number of providers in the program has gone down. Not quite as much as our clients, but we do see a decline, especially in some of our types of childcare that we accept. Okay, next slide. As far as our funding goes, about 36% of our funding in FY17 came from state general revenue. 42% of our funding actually comes from TANF, and then 20% from the Child Care and Development Fund. Okay, next slide. We definitely serve more 6 to 12-year-olds than any other age group. This was just a snapshot from March 2016. And second, 3 to 4-year-olds. We do see some decrease in our younger populations that are maybe transitioning to preschool for all. So we're looking at these numbers as well to see where the gaps are and how we may better serve certain age groups. Okay, next slide. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Wow, lots of great information there, Mike. So I'll open it up. Any questions? Or Donna, do you have anything you want to add?
This is Donna. I wanted to say I don't know why I thought the greatest number of kids would be, 3 to 5-year-olds or something, but they're the 6 to 12-year-olds. My goodness, I
was surprised by that too.
Gosh, that's almost half. Well, not quite half, but a third, more than a third. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. I was going to mention that, and Mike may have already seen this, but there's quite a push even now from the Office of Head Start and the Office of Child Care for early Head Start child care partnerships, and they have some good information about layering funding on the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge website, the Head Start website, which I think could apply to anyone, PFA and a child care program or Head Start and a child care program. I mean, what they say is that the basis of the funding is the CCAP funding, and what the provider, say the child care center, and then when Head Start or Preschool for All would come in, if they blended the funding, and we shouldn't be saying blending because things don't really blend, they layer. I think anyone who's dealt with cost allocation probably wouldn't like that word blending very much, but then it would, say the Head Start funding or the early Head Start funding would come in on top of that, and the kids that qualified for early Head Start or Head Start, would have the whole classroom would benefit. There would be maybe a curriculum bought and some screenings that go on, and everybody would be involved. We wouldn't just pick out the kids that qualified for Head Start. Probably most of the kids in the center might if they're, on CCAP. And then there might be the third layer of funding from Head Start or early Head Start would be for those children that might have an IEP or an IFSP that would need some individual special services or some involvement from a family advocate that might do some work with a few families, some of the families that would need that funding. But it's a really good, we could put that in our guidance document, Michelle and Mike, if you will work with us maybe, or someone from maybe Felicia from your office work with this guidance document that we're going to put together. We could add all that information to it also. So I like all the changes.
I'll help in any way I can.
Great.
I think that would be really helpful as, we share models that are, that programs are currently using, and how they might be layering services may be very helpful, I think. Sometimes I always look for examples or models. So I was just going to add that we do have the MCV funding that, is state, federal funds that come to Illinois to invest in home visiting. Donna, do you want to share a little bit about what you know about McVie? I know we have a couple of Head Start programs that are accessing McVie funding and providing services with it.
Yeah, they do run a lot like Early Head Start and Prevention Initiative. They do have some, I think, some different outcomes and things that they're looking at with families, but I don't believe there's income levels for McVie, but I do think they, try to work prenatally, and they sometimes target teen parents, and I guess it kind of depends on the program. I was trying to check to see who's on the call here. Is anybody on the call that has McVie in their area? Maybe not. But they use, Early Head Start is one of the models they use. They use either parents as teachers or Baby Talk or Nurse Family Partnership. And they don't use Baby Talk. There's Healthy Families, I think. And they are a pretty small program in Illinois. I think they only have about 1,000 children that they work with, but they've recently been, I think, going to be refunded for, some more for a continuation. They were writing a continuation grant, I believe, recently. Gosh, I guess that's about all I know about them. I know they're not
If I wanted to apply for McVie funding, how would I do that? Is that through Illinois State Board of Ed or?
No, it's not Illinois State Board of Ed. I would have to ask Penny for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's through the governor's office.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I don't think I think they have contracts with certain providers that they're using.
Yes.
But it wouldn't hurt to contact them and say that a program was interested in being a part of McVie. They do also have a website called iGrow. It's a lowercase I and then GROW that talks a lot about their program and talks about the sites and where they're at. They do not have performance standards like Head Start does. I mean, they're not a home visiting program that makes weekly home visits and so many a year and so many socializations. They have they go by the guidelines of their models, Parents as Teachers or Healthy Families, to my knowledge.
And then the other one I wanted to throw out there is Healthy Families Illinois, which is administered by DHS. Do you know, so that I know we have a couple of programs that are also Healthy Families Illinois providers. So that is also another funding stream for home visiting that comes in to the state, or administered by the state.
They were recently recompeting their Healthy Families programs. DHS, Mike, do you know if that has closed or is that opportunity open for people still to apply?
I am not aware. I do not know.
House probably, I imagine. Might not be.
Are you aware of that?
No, I was just about to say I'm not aware of that. And it's called Healthy Families of Illinois?
Right.
Yes.
I can check with Penny.
Yeah, the mission of the Healthy Families Illinois is to promote child well-being and prevent child abuse and neglect of children through home visiting services. And the overarching umbrella is Healthy Families America, and they use a strength-based approach which promotes parent-child bonding and positive interaction, educates parents about child health and development, and helps parents to access community resources, and uses family and community supports to assist parents in addressing problems such as substance abuse and mental health issues. So they do home visiting. It sounds a lot like Head Start. That's why it's a good fit to new and expectant families who with identified risk factors. Again, we're using the word risk factors for child maltreatment and whose income is less or equal to 185% of the federal poverty level. So they recruit parents prenatally or within 2 weeks of birth. They provide home visits lasting 60 minutes. So very similar. So not quite the standards that Early Head Start has or Head Start. But we do have, a couple of our Early Head Start programs that are offering Healthy Families Illinois. I just wanted to throw that into the loop and make sure everyone was aware of that as a funding stream or funding possibilities.
Yeah, that's another, I'm glad you mentioned those, Lori, because that's, I can remember back when I was a director, we had Early Head Start and home-based, and we applied for a prevention initiative grant, or we, and got it. And, so we basically ran it like our Early Head Start program because we thought those, the performance standards were a little higher in some cases with the intensive home visiting and the duration things. So programs can do that, access some state funding or McV funding or the DHS Healthy Families funding and expand a little, because generally there are a lot of birth to 3 kids out there that don't have a program.
Yeah, and I do know they have a priority areas of service, and so they have, if you're on the phone, I'm just going to run through these real quick in case you're in one of these funding priority areas, but Vermilion County, Iroquois County, the Chicago community of Rogers Park, a combined area that may include all or a part of the Chicago community areas of Austin, Avondale, Belmont. So they've got several listed there. Then Greater East St. Louis, of course, and then the Chicago community area near West Side. So they have targeted areas that they're prioritizing. So that, and that could change as things move forward, but that's the latest that's on the information I have. So anyways, that Don, I interrupted you. Back to you.
Oh no, you didn't. I was through. So were those McV sites or were those Healthy Family sites?
Oh, Healthy Families.
Okay.
Those were Healthy Families. Yes.
Yeah.
But I do believe McV, which stands for Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting, also has targeted areas they work through too. Is that right, Donna?
That's as far as I know. Some of them were the same, like Vermilion County, and I think I'd have to look at their website to see, all the different areas, but.
Yep. All right. So now that I've sabotaged the conversation, but I wanted to make sure folks were familiar of those 2 funding streams. But any questions that participants on the webinar have for Mike or Michelle? And Michelle, Ioka, if you could open up maybe, or someone is there any chat in the chat room? Are there any questions?
I do not see any questions, but I can definitely unmute everyone if you'd like.
That'd be great. Why don't we try that real quick? See if anyone has questions.
So on my end, I've unmuted everyone. If you're not able to talk, then you might have self-muted, and so you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, for those on the webinar, questions for Michelle or Mike or Donna? Okay. That must mean that Michelle and Mike did a great job, because I have a better feeling or a better understanding of both, ISBE, Early Childhood Block Grant funding, and then CCAP funding. So, So very big thank you to both Michelle and Mike for taking time, putting this PowerPoint slides together and running us through and talking about both ISB and DHS programs. Just a reminder that we do have next week a cost allocation blended funding training that's being done by the Office, well, it's Child Care and the Office of Child Care and Office of Head Start National Training Center is offering, coming in and doing, sharing their expertise around, cost allocation and layered services training. So that you can find more information about that on our Illinois Head Start website. That's ilheadstart.org. So really easy. I want to again thank you, say a special thank you to the State Board of Ed and the Department of Human Services for sharing their expertise around these really complex programs that have, potential impact that we could layer with our Head Start funding to provide additional services in our communities. Donna, do you have anything you want to say in closing?
I'm just excited that Michelle and Mike or Keisha or Felicia could, we'll all get together and develop this guidance document, which hopefully, we can come up with some innovative ideas for ways to layer funding that will pass an audit. We hope. We don't want to get anybody in trouble. But I'm excited, looking forward to that. And I'll be in touch with you guys if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, I'd love to.
Great.
Sounds great. And Mike, do you have any closing remarks?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So.
And Michelle, do you have any closing remarks?
Nope, I don't believe so. Thank you.
All right. Well, happy Tuesday to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you to Michelle and Mike for taking time, and then for all of you taking time out of your what feels like Monday morning, but really Tuesday, to join us and listen in. So we appreciate it, and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.